any elective position. So the same is the case for the campaign financing, that the principal beneficiaries of these resources. So it's unlikely that they can raise the bar so high so that they're not going to be beneficiaries. But when you look at the list that given in the Standard today, I wonder why in the last couple of days, all the newspapers have been having those interesting headlines that are the people behind the campaign financing. But one would have expected, if the journalists who are doing the investigative pieces are actually serious, to go the extra mile and expose the cartels that are financing both parties, Jubilee and NASA, so that we are able to establish their interest. For instance, when you look at Jubilee...
Yeah, well, what makes you think they're cartels, first of all, financing these parties?
Well, when you look at the two political parties, it's unlikely that any rational human being would want to give a fortune to these political parties. Because we need to get maybe the example of Boniface Mwangi, who is getting financed, getting 10 shillings from interested Kenyans. But don't you think it's actually rational? Irrational, rather, if you get somebody like I've seen in the page one, there are people like Simba or Mdhoka giving as much as 1 billion. If you're able to write a check or wire 1 billion to a political party, what is your interest and what do you expect in return? I doubt whether any rational human being in Kenya would have so much love for Jubilee or President Kenyatta and then just give him 1 billion without a consideration. Now, these are the people at the end of the day, if Kenyatta retains position, these are the people who are given all these infrastructure projects. Like, for instance, if you look at the standard gauge SGR, that would give you an indication of how mischievous we are. We are told by respected people, including the Economist publication from the UK, that ideally it would have taken 16 billion to upgrade the railway line. But now we decided to terminate a contract, get new players on board, using special purpose vehicle, and use an extra 311 billion. So now, who is this person who got 311 billion? In other words, how many billionaires and billionaires did we make from the SGR, from the new contracts? Now, if you're able to get that information into detail, then we'll understand why people are giving a fortune to these political parties. But coming up with that kind of headline, it leaves somebody on it.
And we'll come back to that, the impact of having this anonymous funding to political parties and individuals. But Bigambo, are we making too much a big deal out of this? Initially, IBC had stipulated about 5 billion shillings to run a serious presidential campaign. And many political parties said that was too little. But just to put it into perspective, even it's put here in the Nation, if you spend 100,000 shillings every single day from January 1st to December, it would take you 137 years to deplete 5 billion shillings. So it's a lot of money that we're talking about, especially in the current economic dispensation that we have. Are we taking this way too far?
Well, our politics is so much under elite capture. The elites have infiltrated, captured, and they're strangling our politics because of vested interests. And when you look at it more deeply, you realize that a number of times it is because of the push of some elites behind various party affiliations or behind certain individuals that even push those individuals to make sure that they are on the ballot or they contest again, etc. But much more than that, it makes a serious joke of the pieces of legislation that we have in place. For example, even the provision by IEBC or recommendation proposal that we need to have 5 billion shillings for campaign for presidential candidate. And then again that for a gubernatorial position, the estimate was that one is going to spend between 100 and 500 million shillings, depending on the area or how urban or how urban the area is. But then you wonder how a governor, for example, would spend $500 million, and even when it comes to the kind of remuneration they'll get while in office, it cannot even come to a third of that kind of amount. Then it tells you that there are huge interests, within the political world. But the fact that we have a very serious departure between our pieces of legislation and our politics, then if you put all this into perspective, you realize that there is so much that does not come to the surface. And then again, legislation alone does not help, will not help. Because when it comes to politics, most of the time politics are emotional. You cannot legislate emotions. So whatever we do, we cannot legislate how supporters want to even carry their candidates shoulder high, etc., and engage in all this. But in the end, I think to move forward as a country, the place of institutionalizing our democracy demands, one, that we respect our pieces of legislation, that we respect our policies in place. Then thirdly, we do not have the elites trying to manipulate the institutions in their favor. Because when you look at electioneering periods, you realize that various political elites want to have their way, want to control, or want to have the decisions made by various institutions that drive our democracy to act at their behest, which should not be the case.
All right. Ndegwa, serious issues that are being discussed. Where does that even leave the integrity question, especially for the candidates that we already have?
Thank you, Michelle. I will just begin where Bigambo has left, that we need to look at a situation whereby we can institutionalize our democracy. And for him, he takes it that our democracy is being driven by the elites. But for me, I look at it like a hybrid of the elites and the proletarians. In matter of fact, we the elites are the persons who sit in parliament and probably come up with these kind of legislations, and we do not juxtapose it as to where it's supposed to be applied to. Because when we sit in parliament and make these legislations, when NGOs meet somewhere in a hotel and propose for these legislations and they discuss them, they fail to realize that the recipients of these legislations are Mwananchi, and they are the majority. So when you tell a member of parliament you're supposed to spend this amount of money, you're essentially just taking into consideration the issues of logistics perspectives, that you'll need these cars, you'll need these election materials. So this money will be enough for purchasing all these things. But essentially, the big money never goes towards facilitating the campaigns or acquiring the election materials. It actually goes into the question of bribing voters, so that voters then can be able to support you. And that's, you can see, there are people that are now coming up with billions of shillings supporting the presidential elections, not for purposes of fueling the choppers that we see, not for purposes of fueling the big guzzlers, but for purposes of bribing the voters. Like now you can hear Jubilee saying that they have given some amount of money to the IDPs. Probably that's the only amount of money that we know from the treasury. The question is, where are these other billions going to? How are they being channeled? And that now brings me to the question you've just asked, that the reason why we wanted to legislate on these campaign expenditures was so that we can get the best into the process of the campaigns and to the elections. So that when you come with billions of money, we'll be able to hold you into account and ask you, where did you get this money? How did you make this money? And to make sure that the politics is not infiltrated by people who have unclean money into the politics.
Right.
But now the question is, where are we applying that one, in which environment? And that now brings the question of Chapter 6 into a very, very bad state of applicability in this country, because one, if you apply it, you'll not be able to bribe the voters. If you apply the Campaign Financing Act, you'll not be able to buy the voters, because majority of the politicians are never elected on the basis of the policies.
And is that such a bad thing if for once we have an election campaign where the law does not allow any bribery whatsoever? Is that such a bad thing?
It is. It is extremely bad, even
because wouldn't that force the electorate to for once vote on the basis of issues and track record of these leaders that they have?
If you look at their campaign platforms, look at NASA, look at Jubilee, none of them has ever come up with a policy. For instance, Jubilee is telling us we have constructed the SGR. And now that's already a done project, but they're taking it as a campaign tool. And that's why you saw there's an act of parliament, actually the Campaign Financing Act, and it says that at a particular time, you're not supposed to advertise what either the governor has done or what the president has done or what the MP has done for 3 months to the time of the elections. You're not supposed to say this bridge was constructed by so-and-so, the sponsor is so-and-so. For making sure that even the players that are not in office at that particular time, they're also not given undue advantage by the incumbent.
All right.
But you can see what NASA is telling us, what Jubilee is telling us, and then NASA is also telling us, wewe, huyu mtoto, huyu bibi ulimpata, akiwa vile ulimpata. I don't want to mention those words. So,
All right, let's move away from that. It's a very interesting conversation, but let's continue with page six of the paper. And this is with regard to the economy. Let's move away from politics for a moment. And this is an article about why Kenyans pay more taxes than their neighbors. As it stands, Tanzania pays a total revenue of 578 billion shillings. Rwanda follows with about 121 billion shillings. When it comes to Kenya, we have total tax revenue of 1.4 trillion shillings. And the question is, with the tax Kenyans are paying, especially Dismas having a background in economy, this is page 6 of the paper, are Kenyans getting the benefit of the taxes they're paying?
You know, Michelle, there is no problem in paying up to 50% of your income as taxes. If you look at most of the Scandinavian countries like Norway, Denmark, they pay on average up to 50% of their taxes. They go to the state. But what do you get in return? Everything. You get almost everything free. If it's about education, you can read all the way to the university without having to pay a coin. If you go for hiking, you go to a particular mountain and you get an accident, there'll be a police helicopter or an emergency helicopter to come and rescue you. If you're looking for security, you do not need to get a private security. So really, the absolute figures are not necessary. But our problem in Kenya is that you pay very high rates of taxation, but still at the end of the day, there's no return for that taxation. Like for instance, you would expect after paying up to 60% of your income as a tax, that you are not going to start looking for private watchmen in your neighborhood, that you're not going to pay for garbage collection, that you're not going to pay another person to deliver water, that when you go to hospitals, you're supposed to get the basic facilities. But unfortunately, in our situation, you pay a lot of resources to the government and there's no return on investment. And you know, it goes back to governance and corruption, because our public servants, the people we have entrusted with our resources, they do not take care of the resources. Ndegwa raises a very important point. The laws are very clear that you're not supposed to use taxpayers' revenues to advertise for political purposes. But now you see all these adverts around the delivery units, what the president has done for the last 4.5 years. If we're in a serious economy or a serious jurisdiction, those people would actually be penalized. Even though we have that provision today in law, but I wonder why IBC is not acting on it. And really, at the end of the day, it's for our leadership to know that taxpayers need a very good return on their investment. That if you are, say, in Norway, when you pay those high levels of taxation, you've got peace of mind that everything else is going to be provided. There'll be public goods. In fact, if, say, you earn 100,000 and you pay taxation up to 60,000, the balance of 40,000, if you're in Norway, that could actually be your savings. So you get your salary and it stays in the account because everything else is going to be provided for free.
Bigambo, your thoughts on this? I mean, in terms of maximizing on the taxes that Kenyans pay.
When he was running for president the first time in 1992, Bill Clinton's campaign mantra was, "It is the economy, stupid." Actually, even here, it's the economy, stupid, really. Because we're having millions of Kenyans who are working for the economy, but the economy is not working for the people. The math doesn't really add up. And that is why you see that the shoulders of Kenyans are even getting weighed down by the weight of the struggles and the boggles of this economy. Now, the thing is this. We do not have leaders who connect issues that would transform or have the economy work for the people, even as it is up to the people and demanded of the people to pay the taxes. For example, look at all these presidential candidates today in this election, in the 2013 election, and even in other elections before. For instance, one key sector, even in Kenya today, operating here in Nairobi, that I've not had any candidate speak to, and I know you've heard about these, the light industries in Dandora areas. I have not had any candidate speak to how they are going to revolutionize or even pump money to see how they can scale up the productivity of the light industries in Eastlands and other areas that were majority of Kenyans, so even Juakali, areas that work. So the thing is this, people are going to work harder, pay more taxes. Others are going to demand salary increases, as we are seeing day by day, forgetting that the more they have salary increases, the more the exchequer has got to see how to raise this money, the more they'll be taxed. And then you live your life not having lived at all. So the fact is this, we need to have ways of political economy working and making sense for the Kenyans. Then we also need to see, I've heard politicians, whether it's in government today, Jubilee, whether it's the presidential candidate for NASA, saying that I know where the holes are, I'm going to, to close them up. I know where the holes are. That doesn't even make sense. That doesn't even add up. Because when you look at both sides, whether it is the counties that we have today, or even when they were in government, or rather how Jubilee is in government today, how come they have not managed to contain matters of graft on their ends at all? They're not even making impressive effort. How come their parties have cleared individuals who have got integrity issues, touching on corruption, etc.? Then we have got even other institutions. For example, I've heard even the chair to the EACC actually bringing the question yet again, like other people that he succeeded, that actually there are some people who are trying to influence the decisions of the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission. Then we ask ourselves, even as I sit in this couch today, do we need some of these institutions? Now, when it comes, for example, to some pieces of legislation, a pregnant question arises. Do we legislate just because we want to appear impressive with our pieces of legislation, or do we need to have legislation that makes sense, that is practical, that can be implemented? For example,
the thing is, are Kenyans asking these questions because many times the political class does things with goodwill when there's a political price to pay. Is it that there's no political price to pay when dealing with matters of the economy for Kenyans?
There is always a price to pay. Question is, who pays it? Most of the time, the politicians scarcely pay that price. It is the ordinary Kenyans who pay for it. Now, for example, look at a piece of legislation on campaign or financing. And, well, of course, unless the law is operating in a vacuum, if a government, and this should not be a political party issue, if a government has served and worked for the people, it should be the people, because they're the ones who finance these projects, who should be proud of those projects. It must not be about the government or a political party just stamping about what has been done, or even an opposition party demonizing what has been done. So that here we look at things with very crisp and crystallized eyes, that is this making a country better? For example, when you look at the SGR, there are many awful things about that project. What has happened that need not to have happened. But then we could also sit back and ask ourselves, could there be few benefits about that project? And that moving forward, we need to see how those who are behind the curtains, working to make sure that this thing is riddled in graft, could be brought to book.
Right.
So the issue of bringing people to book should be at the forefront, not the question of demonizing a whole thing.
Right.
And in fact, moving forward, I would like, even whether it's Jubilee or even NASA, speaking to the issue not only of curtailing or curbing corruption, but having people to be held to account, especially in a situation like this where individuals, out of their own volition, are coming to finance political parties without even indicating what kind of promissory notes they have signed with these politicians.
All right. Ndegwa,
Yes.
have we seen the political class? We've seen them, and we've had the government especially say that there's no money to pay teachers, there's no money to pay doctors. But have we seen political class campaigning and telling Kenyans how they're going to better the country's economy?
They have never and they'll never. For one thing is that they are the biggest beneficiaries of what happens in the economy. May I say that the reason why it is so difficult to implement the new constitution, and most importantly, Article 10, which speaks about accountability, the national values and principles of governance, among them being accountability and transparency. And then when you read that one again, as against Article 2.1, which speaks about the principles of public finance, among them being equitable distribution of resources and equitable taxations of Kenyans. The reason why it is so much difficult to implement those one is because the moment you start implementing the principle and the doctrine of transparency and accountability, then somebody somewhere is going to go hungry. And that someone is not Wanjiku walking on the streets, but it's a person who is actually in government who is benefiting. Why I'm accusing government is because, and this I'm looking at government, either you are in opposition in parliament, in Senate, or in the county governments, for NASA and the Jubilee side, is because you do not want to be questioned as to how you applied a particular amount of money allocations that you are given, and whether or not it yielded the intended results of benefiting Wanjiko, and whether or not there was value for what was invested. The reason why Kenyans are, again, being so much taxed, and we need to look at the cross-section of the society that is heavily burdened by this taxation. It's a small cross-section of the society that is overburdened. For instance, if you're working for government, you'll pay things called pay as you earn. I hear there's so many taxations that you undergo. And then you just you look at a person who is a mamamboga somewhere. That person is probably paying for only the VAT that she buys sugar, and now, remember, you cannot even be taxed for unga. But look at it now. When you are it's called what? Subsidizing unga, and this money that you're taking, you're subsidizing it from the Kenyan exchequer, and then you tell us that the maize that came had been purchased by private millers, and then you tell us we have taken the taxpayers' money to subsidize those private millers, and then the person who has subsidized is the person who is in the great or in the bigger cross-section of the society that is in production. So for us to have equitable taxation, we need to bring up those guys who are here below the production level. We uplift them to a situation whereby they are also being productive, as Bigambo was saying. We think about the Juakali person. How can we uplift his production? How can we perfect his production? How can we add precision into what he does? So that we can all have and share that burden of taxation. Because this country is going to be built by taxpayers' money. Government doesn't have money. But the Kenyans are asking, yes, we are actually ready, able, and willing to be taxed. But is there value for the taxation?
Right, all right. And let me wind up with Dismas. Do Kenyans understand what they need to get out of their taxes to begin with to make this an electoral issue, a political issue, a campaign issue for their leaders? They
do understand. They know the value. Like in the recent past, they've been asking questions. And a number of the current serving members of the National Assembly and the Senate have actually lost elections as a result. But the problem is that in as much as we want to ask these questions, there is a big movement that if you want to participate in elections, it's all about your communities. So we go back to our tribal cocoons that say if you come from a Jubilee dominant area, say Rift Valley province and central Kenya, in as much as you know that people from a particular community have been accused of mischief, when the rubber meets the road, people will still go back to their community and say, let me vote for somebody, whether or not it's a thief from a community, than giving a vote to another person. Like for instance, so many people have been accused of corruption allegations, that resources were stolen from the NYS around Eurobond. And some of the architects of NYS, some of the beneficiaries of Eurobond have been cleared by the various political parties. Some of them have been cleared by Jubilee, some of them have been cleared by NASA. And they're going to run for governorship position. And you know, Ndego comes from one of those counties that are somebody whose name has been linked to NYS has been cleared to run for the position of governor. Now, those people, they are left because you are given choices, and all of them are accused of having stolen from the public good. So you begin to wonder, what do I do? Do I abstain?
And they're the same people who nominated them, because the nomination process was open. The residents, they had to make that choice, and they made that choice.
Now, Michelle, you know, the way we do our nominations in Kenya, it's actually a comedy. The people who are supposed to take part in the party primaries, especially the middle class, have no time for that. Because, you know, has it not bothered you that the party primaries are held in the middle of the week? So if you are employed, say, working for Safaricom at the call center, you are not going to tell Mr. Bob Collymore that, excuse me, sir, I'm not coming to work on Tuesday because I'm going to participate in the party primaries. So what our politicians do, they go get unemployed people from the villages and, you know, give them some money, give them an incentive to go and cast their ballot. If I may use the example of a constituency that I know very well, like Kitutu Church South, it's got 55,000 registered voters. You would expect that during the party primaries, you would have maybe up to 30,000 coming out. But the person who won, who is representing ODM from that constituency, merely got 3,000 votes, thereabouts. Meaning that these are the people that were able to be given an incentive. And I think really, as a democracy, if you want to make progress, we must start joining the dotted lines as voters to understand, like for instance, in this particular election, we must understand that it's not between Raila Odinga and President Uhuru Muigai Kenyatta. It's about us. That when you've got a very good leader, he comes up with a very solid decisions or policies, it will make you a better person. For instance, the middle class in Nairobi are struggling to buy houses. You cannot afford a mortgage unless, on average, you earn about 300,000 net, so that you can be given a mortgage of about 100,000. Now, when you look at the Jubilee Manifesto today, they've done nothing to increase the housing stock in Kenya. Now, as a Kenyan, if you go through the Jubilee Manifesto or if you go through the NASA Manifesto and you do not find a leader who is able to create those opportunities for more housing, then now you need to begin asking questions. But unfortunately for most of us, we are not able to create that link. We just think that electing leaders is something automatic you
how
do
do we
every 5
create
years.
that link, considering that those living, or the poor rather, those living below the poverty line make up the majority at the end of the voting population, and among them are also the youth. And so if the middle class are not as interested in voting or have this safe cocoon, how then do we start making that difference within the lower class? Which is the majority of the voting population.
Yeah, I can attempt to give a solution. Like, for instance, when we had the Unga crisis, when it was very easy for you to get a chapati instead of getting ugali, there was increasing pressure. That's when you saw Jubilee moving with speed to bring these maize with all the controversies associated with this. And then, for a few days, people are happy. But right now, if you go to the supermarkets in Nairobi, you're trying to look for that unga, you cannot get it. And unfortunately, the only time it becomes a hot issue, like especially the Unga crisis, is when NASA picks it up. And as soon as they've achieved their objectives, then they lie low. But therein, you raise a very fundamental issue, that when you're offering subsidies from the taxpayers, we're supposed to be a beneficiary of those subsidies. All over the world, and I've done research on this, if you want to subsidize anything, you subsidize at the production center. Like, for instance, if you want to subsidize maize in Kenya, you subsidize the farmers, not the middlemen. And when you're offering those subsidies, make sure that it's very solid. Farmers from Trans Nzoia today are crying that they were given poor quality fertilizer as a subsidy, they were given poor seeds as a subsidy. So in as much as you've been given subsidized seeds, you go plant them, you're given horrible fertilizer. At the end of the day, you get a horrible crop. And for the few people who are able to surmount those challenges and get a very good produce and it's kept in their silos, the Kenyan government was not willing to buy. So really, as a nation, I think we need to wake up and realize that, especially as we go to this election, that it's not really about Raila or President
It's
Kenyatta.
about us.
Like, for instance, if you look at the issue of healthcare, which is a serious issue, pensioners in Kenya are crying every single day. They cannot access medical facilities.
All right, that's why I'll have to cut you off. You're taking too much time. We'll come back to that issue, but I want to also link that up with the preparedness of the elections, because we're heading to the elections. This is where these decisions and many of these changes will be exhibited. So let's take a look at what's on the front page of the Saturday Nation here, and that's 1 million dead voters riddle for IEBC, and the auditors recommend cleaning up of the register ahead of the elections. Remember, we have about 58 days to the elections. IEBC says some of the anomalies are already being addressed. But here's what the auditors revealed in terms of numbers. We have 25 million number of eligible voters, but not all of them are registered. And we have 264,000 people in the register who have issues of duplicated, missing or invalid identification cards. And we also have the 92,000 dead voters. Some say 92,000. They started here. The Nation here says 1 million dead voters. The issue is there are several dead voters in the voters register. IEBC initially had said that issue was dealt with. Ndegwa,
yes.
Where are we in preparedness?
I kept on saying why the first Jubilee nominations failed was because they had not put a bit of resources into the question of logistics. And I believe that logistics is one of the fundamental infrastructure in delivering a credible election. And logistics involves issues like of cleaning the register and making sure that the facilities that are of essence insofar as delivering a credible elections are in place even before we get to the time of the the voting. These are the things that we ought to have dealt with about 3 months ago, not 50-something days to the elections. And of course, we are where we are because there was an interruption with the Electoral Commission for almost a year when the former commissioners were not able to do and execute their mandate under the AIBC Act because of the interruption that occurred in between. And that is what ushered us into where we are today, that Chebukati Commission does not look to be properly prepared to deliver a credible election. Some of the examples that you would give are that this commission is the one that cleared Wavinya Ndeti. This commission has to be reminded by someone somewhere that Wavinya Ndeti belongs to 2 political parties. Yet the chairman is a person who authorized the clearance of this, of this one candidate. So we are only hoping that as at 8th of August, a miracle will have happened for Chebukati to have put in place the required infrastructures. Even as we are speaking right now, there are some, the integrated identification systems have not yet arrived. It's only, I think, a week ago when 10,000 arrived. But those are not enough to deliver credible elections.
Right, and just, I mean, to be fair to IEBC, the 10,000 arrived, giving the total of kits in the country to 35,000, but 10,000 more are yet to arrive.
Yes.
So there's still a deficit of 10,000 in
Yes.
the country. But we have 35,000. Just yesterday, they began the process of testing these electoral kits as well. But Jarvis, IEBC says some of these issues are being sorted out. Are they well in time for this process?
One thing, I think I need to say this, that as a nation, it is important for us to deregularize the repetitive regularity of sensational appetites that we have. Everything, there is a thirst for sensationalism. Now, for example, when it comes to the audit issues, yeah, they're very important. Who contracted the auditor? Then what business does the auditor have to create some sensational issues about it? Let the IBC come clean on this. For example, they're the ones who engage the auditors, that now the audit report or preliminary report is out. This is what has come out, and this is how we are going to tackle it. It needs not to be an issue that is going to kill people in this country. We need to look at issues in a very sober way, because in a time such as this, unless we are careful as a nation, when we look back at our history in 2007, it is this kind of sensationalism that leads to tempers flaring or emotions building up, etc. Now, the thing is...
Michelle, just one, before, as he proceeds, that he can have a rejoinder. Let me remind him, he said that you cannot legislate on emotional issues, and therefore, even question of the numbers is emotional because it involves a political process. So would you address that one as well?
Yes, sure. Now, the fact is this. We need to have clean, clear, acceptable results at the end of August, at the beginning of August in the elections. Now, that happens by us demanding the best and helping IEBC become the best, all right? And here, the thing is this. IEBC is funded by the Kenyans. We need to demand the best of it. We need to hold IEBC accountable, all right? The issue of the audit of the voters register, it was paramount, because now none of us wants, for the growth of our democracy, to have non-existing voters coming to vote. And yes, in fact, it is an obfuscating issue that we have had that happen before. Moving forward, of course, looking at it because things happen in the hands of the Almighty, even on the 7th of August, there will be a few dead voters in the register, because no one determines who will leave which day or who will exit or shuffle off this mortal coil. So the thing is this. We want this matter to be handled quickly, but IEBC is late. These audit issues, much as, of course, I appreciate the court issues that were there that led to this delay, should have happened way ago, so that at this moment, it's a question of polishing up. And moving forward, yes, much as this something has been on the table of discussion for some time now, we appreciate that in this country, we have never, ever been ready for any election. Elections always find us. We have never been ready for any election. And even in 2017, I have brought myself to the conclusion that we are going to get to the August the 8th without being very ready for that election.
All right, and let's hope maybe Dismas has a different view to that. Do you think it's sufficient time for us to go to these elections ready? And do you agree that we've never really been prepared for any election in this country?
Well, if you study the way IBC is preparing the elections, and you go out of your way to try and understand, we need to give them a pat on the back. They're trying to create those predictable systems which will give us unpredictable outcomes. And I'd like to address it from 3 aspects. Let's look at the human capital. Number 1, you had so many top officials working at the secretariat whose only intention was to make a quick buck from every single process. And you've seen IBC firing a number of senior officers, which in my view, they should keep on firing anybody who stands in the way of a free, fair, and credible election. So if they fire another officer today, even if he's the CEO or any other senior officer today, we shouldn't be worried because the commissioners know the buck stops with them. They're the ones who must create those systems, predictable systems for unpredictable outcomes. And then number 2, we gave them the responsibility of auditing the voters' register to ensure that everything is solid. And through some process, KPMG was appointed. There were legal issues, battles. Eventually, they were given the mandate. So in my view, there's nothing wrong when KPMG comes out with the results of the assignment to tell us, you gave us a responsibility, this is what we found out. If you look at the flip side, if KPMG had kept quiet, get the results, and in the middle of the night hand it over to IBC, we'd still be seated here asking several questions, smelling a rat. And then when you look at the technology, in fact, this time around we are better off. Because during the last election, the technology landed in Kenya 2 days before the election. At least this time around, it's landed 60 days before the election, and everything is being tested out. And we must not forget the fact that part of the reason why we had a crisis last time is there were so many technologies which were not compatible, which had not been tested. But right now, IBC has been given that opportunity. Maybe what we need to do is do an investigation, understand the decision-making process at IBC. Where does the buck stop? Does it stop with the commissioners? Does it stop with the secretariat? And a number of these secretariat members who've been fired or sent on a compulsory leave, like for instance, Mr. Mwati was sent on a compulsory leave a few days ago. When he's told to give evidence that he's prepared a system which is going to give us a credible election, what gives him the guts to refuse to disclose or share with the other directors the licensing requirements? Like for instance, when you're using any of this software, you need to be sure that the license is up to date. When he's got the guts to ignore calls from his commissioners, who is he responding to? Now, these are the kind of investigations that we need to do to find out the commercial interests and who is promoting those catfights. And there's no time you'll ever be ready for an election in Kenya. It's a complicated simultaneous equations with so many moving parts. But from where I'm seated today, and with the interaction with IBC, I think this commission has made very good progress.
Right.
Because, I mean, it's this commission which actually admitted for the very first time since 1963 that in fact we have dead voters. The other commissioners decided to bury their heads under the sand. So I think we need to give them time, but at the same time apply pressure on them on a daily basis for them to tell us, for us to have a credible election, these are the systems we are putting in place so that we can actually audit them.
Right.
And then this idea of a funny thing, people saying that it's too close to the election, you cannot fire a commissioner or a senior manager. All of us are mottos. For instance, if, God forbid, but if any commissioners or a senior officer dies, say, on the 7th of August, the following day we should be able to have an election. That's our best practice.
All right. And just also going back to the Wavinya Ndeti issue, which you brought up, Ndegwa, this we saw on Thursday, I believe, when her the nomination certificate was nullified by the court. And this has also brought up a lot of questions about IBC. But let's just focus also on the Machakos politics just for a bit. Just get an understanding of what's happening here, because this is not the first time we're seeing a legal battle surrounding this very same certificate. What do you think is happening in Machakos?
I think Machakos is one of the indicators as to maybe which side the country is going. And it's just a new entrance in Kenyan politics in the sense that we have a mixed grill in Machakos, which NASA and Jubilee are contesting for. You realize that the current governor with the Chap guy, says that he's warming up towards Jubilee. And the Chap guy was once a wiper. He was whisking the wiper card. And now, all of a sudden, having been converted into a Jubilee, and then the Wiper people feel that they need to get back what belongs to them. So Machakos becomes an interesting county to watch, and it is being contested by the two functions, and that is why we are then having a problem maybe with Wavinya Ndeti's candidature. Essentially, remember, sometimes back when Kevi Kilonzo was supposed to vie for senatorship in Makueni, you remember when she warmed up towards Jubilee, she never had problems of even when she became a registered voter. But when she tilted kidogo and she warmed up towards ODM as at that, or COD as at that, all of a sudden issues emerged that this person is not even a registered voter, this person procured her registration by fraud, and all those things were brought up in the media. And you can see what direction that issue took. So Wavinya Ndeti could be a victim of circumstances as Kefi Kilonzo was, because of the political players and the political competition that is in that particular county. So to me, despite the fact that Wavinya Ndeti ought to have known what the law requires, despite the fact that Wiper ought to have known whether she is fit to be nominated by Wiper, insofar as party registration is an issue, there could be also some serious politics going around Wavinya Ndeti's seat, in the sense that now Machakos County becomes an interesting political county.
All right. Bigambo, even as you comment on Machakos politics, does this also point to a gap in terms of all the stakeholders in this electoral process? Because Wavinya Ndeti says she was cleared by the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission. The Register of Political Parties has also confirmed that she is not a member of two political parties. And how is it that one court deemed or found her as a member of two parties, and then 2 days later another court comes out and clears her? Is there that gap in terms of the judicial process and the electoral process?
Before I just speak to the judicial process and the place of justice and its blindness, it is the mole concept at play within NASA. They have to deal with their own moles, because it's the moles within the NASA that are fighting each other. If you look at the person perhaps who commenced the idea or even birthed the idea of investigating Ndeti and seeing what could be the problem with her candidature, it is a person, and in fact a key leader within NASA. So basically there are some issues, housekeeping issues that NASA themselves need to handle. But much more than that, it behooves Ndeti, and it would have been expected of her, one, upon that kind of agreement that they had, and she acquiesced to move to Wiper, that she should have relinquished her position if she did not, relinquish her position from CCU as the party leader and as a party member, and now join Wiper and even flash the Wiper card as a member.
But did she not do that?
And now, but you see, there are lots of other, when you get to have even other crisp information background, you realize that even some meetings she has had, she's indicated that she has not, relinquished her membership of CCU, but that's private. However, the challenge then here is the place of institutions and how they can synchronize their operations. Now look at the Register of Political Parties, who, upon resignation from a party, a member is supposed to write to the registrar indicating that he or she has quit Party X and is now a member of a certain party. That's even how some candidates who are now running as independents did when they relinquished their membership in certain political parties. Now, a question arises. When IEBC initially cleared Ndeti as the gubernatorial candidate for Wiper for Machakos County, did it have the satisfactory and complete information within its records and within the records of the Register of Political Parties that actually this is a member of the Wiper party and that she belongs not to any other party? We also need to, and when something like this comes up, we take to task even the Register of Political Parties and even that office as an institution. To what extent and how properly and thoroughly should they work with the IEBC, especially at a time such as this, before the IEBC clears certain candidates? Another question then arises. Is there a possibility that there are certain candidates who have been cleared by the IEBC who could be belonging to even other political parties. So here, while we direct our light and our finger to the registrar of political parties, that same finger should be directed to the IEBC as an institution, but much more importantly, should be directed to every political candidate, that it is proper for them to understand laws. Trouble with us is that, and ask even those who are contesting for positions of MCA, parliament, or these are the elective positions. Most political leaders don't take the time to study or to read the law that affects them, especially at a time such as this, or even in a matter of preparedness on how to run and win elections in this country.
Maybe just to add on what you said, insofar as what happened before the IBC tribunal and the court. The IBC tribunal, when it was faced with the facts that Wavinya Ndeti has not yet resigned from CCU, and just before I go that, the question is, where do you begin the process of resignation? Is it with the political parties that you're registered with, or is it the registrar of political parties? The law says, the Political Parties Act says, you first of all issue a resignation notice to your political party, the one that you're resigning from. So the procedure should have been, Wavinya Ndeti ought to have issued a notice to CCU, telling CCU that I have now resigned as a member of this political party. Then with that notice of resignation from CCU, then she goes to the registrar of political parties, who then deletes her names from the register of the CCU. Now, the tragedy is this. There has never been a situation in this country whereby jurisprudence has emerged from party primaries. The only legal jurisprudence that we have are the ones that have emerged as a result of an election process. But party primaries, they have never invited such kind of heated court battles as it is this time round. And that's the reason why we are having a lacuna insofar as the question of jurisprudence is an issue. For instance, the IBC tribunal found that Wavinya Ndeti could not qualify to be nominated as a candidate because she had not resigned from CCU. She goes to the High Court. The High Court has what is called supervisory jurisdiction. It supervises these other small courts, the tribunals and the magistrate courts. So why Wavinya Ndeti went there yesterday is so that the High Court can oversee and supervise and look at what happened before the IBC tribunal, whether the same was legal and was procedurally fair. So she has not been cleared by the High Court. Or what happened is, she went through a procedure called the judicial review process. She's asking the court to interrogate the process in which the IBC came into that conclusion that she's not fit to be nominated as a candidate.
Right.
And now, even on the question, while the question of judicial review suffices, even as she has sought it, and the injunctive relief that she has sought from the court, the thing here then is, you see, and the kind of reliefs that especially politicians seek at a time such as this, they are also going to be contributory in nature to some of the delays and the work of even the IBC. But much more than that, if at all what happened and the decision by the IBC was true, then what is the place of integrity in Ndeti's politics? If at all, some cards then could be playing below the table.
Right, and on Ndeti's politics, but also on the IEBC and this clearance of others as well. Dismas, your thoughts on this, and also the question that Bigambo poses, could we have more candidates who may have not resigned from the previous party? Because we have seen, even for the past 5 years, members of parliament elected on an ODM ticket, decamping to Jubilee, very many issues of those arose.
Now, there are so many questions that you asked in one, and I'll attempt to... Let's start with the political space. When you look at Wavinya Ndeti, we shouldn't be looking at Wavinya Ndeti as the gubernatorial candidates. We are talking about the 2022 succession politics. And there are so many scenarios. The first scenario is, Kalonzo Musyoka knows for a fact that Dr. Alfred Mutua is a threat. Say NASA does not win the presidential campaign, or they do not, Raila Odinga doesn't become the president, and then Alfred Mutua retains his position as a governor. Kalonzo Musyoka will become a chapter in history books. His political capital in the Kamba nation will go to zero, and then Mutua takes over. He becomes the Kamba kingpin. So that's something we need to take into active consideration. And the only person who can stop Dr. Alfred Mutua today is Wavinya Ndeti. And Bigambo spoke about housekeeping, which needs to be done at NASA. But we need to ask ourselves, when Wavinya is undergoing all these tribulations, what is likely the position of Mr. Johnson Muthama in this? Can we try and join the dots to find out where does he sit? Is he part of this process? Is he catalyzing any action? We also need to ask ourselves, where does Dr. Mutua sit in this? Because it's in Dr. Mutua's interest and Muthama's interest that Wavinya Ndeti does not run. But it's in the interest of Kalonzo Musyoka and Raila Odinga and the entire NASA fraternity that Wavinya Ndeti runs for this particular position. So when you look at that, you realize that this is high-octane politics. Even I also suspect that from a Jubilee perspective, I doubt whether the deputy president would be happy to have Mutua running. Because if Mutua retains this position, then 2022, with all his PR glamour and communication strategy, he'll become a very serious presidential candidate. So these are succession issue 2022. Now, coming up to our institutions, it's very disappointing that we are not able to do basic research. And you remember we were told that we have got a working group on chapter 6 that is supposed to go through the basic documents. So you begin to ask yourself, when IBC is receiving papers, what is supposed to be their role? Are they just, when you go present your papers, are they just supposed to acknowledge receipt, stamp, and tell you that you are now a candidate? Or are they supposed to do any background research to establish whether or not you are qualified? And in my view, we keep on beating IBC for the wrong reason. The people who are supposed to establish that your candidature is solid are the clearing agencies. Like, for instance, the Anti-Corruption Commission. On the integrity issues, they're the ones who are supposed to do their background research and find out that this gentleman probably is not qualified. But again, we go back to chapter 6 and the Leadership and the Integrity Act that lowered the bar. The Anti-Corruption Commission has cleared so many people with so many cases in court, and they say, you've not exhausted all the appeal mechanisms. You've not gone to the Court of Appeal. You've not gone to the High Court. So in as much as we have evidence that you've stolen from the public good, we are still going to clear you. So we may not at this stage start blaming Wavinya Ndeti, because what she did, she followed the rules as expected and presented her papers. So now it's up to the clearing agencies that we are supposed to put in task and question them whether or not they are working. Like, for instance, you have a number of people being cleared to run for governorship position who do not have bachelor's degrees. And then you begin to wonder, what's the role of the Minister of Education in this case?
So that being said, then let's wind up with the legal aspect, because even after several governorship aspirants were cleared, there was that list of 106 by the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission of governors who have cases pending in court, governors who have investigations still being done against them. And IBC did write to EACC to seek clarification on what to do with that list and how it would play into the integrity question ahead of the elections. Bigambo, very briefly, because we don't have much time, how does that list come into play?
When this is not only legislative imbroglio, but also altogether political, because it also points to the lack of seriousness on the part of the Kenyans, the people themselves. While the EACC is doing its part, could the people also, in support of these institutions that they have created under financing, demand, and also when it comes to casting their vote, they don't cast their vote for individuals who have got integrity issues? Then the other thing is this: beyond just promulgating the list of individuals whom they have cast aspersions on.
Which came after the IBC clearance process, again raising questions as to the synchrony of these institutions.
Yes. So now that they have not synchronized the operations, and now we are here facing this reality, what is the best that can be done? And what is the worst that can face those politicians? So the question is, to what extent are we going, or are we expecting to have IBC work then together with the EACC through other mechanisms, the judicial mechanisms that are existing, to see how these individuals could be barred on the technicalities of integrity, etc. But then again, of course, we know very well that the law has been termed as a bottomless pit. Look, and even by way of our very own constitution, 47 and 50 articles, you realize that one individual is perceived to be innocent until proven guilty by a competent court of law. So there again, we cannot be the, hold the hangman's noose around the necks of these politicians until also, by way of the rule of law, have them explore the judicial process
So
to
it's
the end
quite
of
a
it.
muddled situation that we're looking at. Ndegwa, let me have your final comments on
Yes.
this.
Now, the question of Chapter 6, the question of the list by the EACC, and the question of the credibility of these people to participate in a political process is purely a legal question. And as he says, we'll never realize the fruits of Chapter 6 when we have the presumption of innocence. So my advice is...
Which is provided by the Constitution.
Yes, and Chapter 6 is a constitutional provision. So there ought to be a serious Supreme Court opinion as to what is the threshold of the application of Chapter 6. Reason being, the presumption of innocence, the threshold is of that beyond reasonable doubts.
Right.
But the question of Chapter 6, some of it are even mere issues of perception. And the good question and the good case in issue here is the case between Athi and Tana River Development Authority and Waitito. The court said that the threshold of Chapter 6 cannot be perceived and looked through the lens of presumption of innocence. Because to that, you require to adduce a lot of evidence. And that is why we cannot cast aspersions as to the people who are highlighted by the EACC. The other thing is, EACC has not taken any legal action against these individuals. We have merely been told that Michelle is not credible, Bigambo is not credible, Dismas is not credible. The question is, take for instance, as I sum up, the issue that Dismas raised, that I come from a county where one of our candidates is in question. The question is, what is the credibility of the process that brought the names of Anne Waiguru into question? She's, of course, challenging that report in court.
Right.
Yes.
So a lot of questions really have to be asked. Very few days to the general election. That conversation, gentlemen, brings us to a close. On Weekend Express, we've been speaking to High Court advocate and governance expert Ndegwa Njiru, also governance expert Javas Bigambo, and political risk analyst Dismas Mukua on the week in review. Thank you so much for watching Weekend Express. My name is Michelle Ngere. I'll be seeing you again at 10 a.m. for more news.